Is agriculture really destroying the earth? Depending on who you talk to, that's what you'll hear. But I'm going to give you a different side of the story in this episode of The Business of Agriculture. Hey, Damian Mason here with a question before we hop into this episode of The Business of Agriculture. If you farm for a living, you employ a lot of amazing technology, from your inputs that you put into the soil to the tractor that you sit in, your combine, and the amazing data that it harvests. But has your soil analytics kept up technologically with everything else in your farming operation? I would venture to say that no, it is not. Sure, you check for your nitrogen, your phosphorus, your potassium, your micronutrients as well. But what about disease pressure? Do you know what diseases and what pests you're going to face next year? No, you don't. But you can now figure that out with Pattern Ag's predictive analytics. Think about it. They can tell you now with testing what the likelihood of facing nasty diseases, things like cyst nematode or sudden death syndrome, what the likelihood of you having this in your field, then you know how to prepare, how to treat, and where to invest your money. It's using technology to make you bigger yields and therefore make you bigger money. Go to www.pattern.ag to learn more. They are pioneering the way in predictive agronomy. Hey there, welcome to another exciting and wonderful episode of The Business of Agriculture. I've got Professor Frank Mitloehner. He's with UC-Davis. He's an animal science professor. He first came on my radar a couple of years back because the New York Times and some other media outlets that are not very kind to agriculture, they might lean a certain way politically, said that he's too close to agriculture, therefore he can't be an expert. Interesting, they never say that about those that are funded by the climate lobby. They're too close to the climate lobby, but they always take that science. Anyway, we hear it all the time that livestock are responsible for 40% of global emissions or 80% of global emissions, depending on which source you hear this from. I've always questioned whether there's any validity to it at all. And in the last 10 years, I've decided, no, there is no validity to it. Well, Frank's the expert on this, not me, but I want to get right into it. Frank, are livestock responsible for the destruction of our environment? Because it doesn't seem anywhere close to logical nor reasonable to believe that that's the case.
Well, Damian, we have pretty good numbers now, both international, national, and regionally for the impact livestock has on climate. The international number that I would hang my hat on is from the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization. I wouldn't have said that 15 years ago, but I do say that today. Their estimate for global livestock emission on climate is that 11% of international greenhouse gases are associated with the livestock sector. That's a number that's then oftentimes used here in the US for the US, and that's wrong because it's a global number, that 11%. The regional number for the US is 4%, and that comes from the Environmental Protection Agency. 4% of all greenhouse gases in the United States stem from livestock. Approximately half of that 4% from beef, a good chunk of it from dairy, and a relatively small amount from pigs and poultry.
All right. You just quoted two sources that I have questioned the credibility of in any way, shape, or form, the EPA and the FAO. Let's start with the FAO. That's part of the United Nations. I've questioned their credibility, given that they've told us we're going to have 11.5 billion people and we're all going to starve. None of that is ferreting out to be true. They've been wrong about a few things before, and they tend to also be very much on the crisis crusade, because if they can continue, Frank, to have a crisis, then they have justification as a bureaucracy, which also gives them budget and power. So you said I wouldn't have said that 15 years ago. Does that mean that you come on board and you believe the Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations more than you did?
So 15 years ago, they came out with a report called Livestock's Long Shadow. And that report was the starting point of the global crusade of the anti-livestock people. Because that report, Livestock's Long Shadow, said that livestock produces 18% of greenhouse gases, more than the global transportation sector. And I critique both the 18% number and the comparison of livestock to transportation. I was very vocal about it. I published peer-reviewed papers on this. And to my surprise, the FAO agreed with my criticism. And that takes a lot for them to write an international report, hear some criticism and agree with the criticism. That comparison of livestock to transportation was retracted by them very quickly. And over time,
it's not even plausible. I mean, my God, when you talk about New Delhi, India, and you get buses and outdated, it's not even plausible that somehow a dairy facility. It just doesn't even seem plausible that the transportation sector, where there's 15 million automobiles sold every year in the United States, and how many on the road? It just doesn't even seem plausible.
Yeah, you're thinking of the U.S., but when you look at global numbers, you have to think of developing countries. A country like Paraguay, for example, has twice as many cattle than they have people. Many African countries are very heavy on the livestock side, have very few transportation modes and so forth. So when you look at the global situation, then things look differently. And we have to divorce ourselves from just thinking U.S. It's not the U.S., it's global. So they have made two departures. The one is this comparison that I just alluded to is gone. They never claimed that again. And secondly, their number estimate went from 18% to 14.5%, now to 11% of global contribution of livestock to climate. In the United States, the agency, whether we like them or not, that is responsible for doing the inventories for greenhouse gases is the EPA. And I think we can agree that if there were two agencies nationally and internationally that would be critical of livestock, it would be the FAO and the EPA. If these two agencies put out numbers of 11% for international and 4% for national, then I would say these numbers are not in a realm of agricultural friendly, but this is, in my opinion, the worst possible there could be. And we can deal with that. I know we can, because while this is not a vast amount, let's say 4% of emissions here in the US, it is still a sizable chunk that we can further reduce. And when we do, we have some really great effects. And I have done a lot of work along those lines on mitigation. Because yes, it's one thing to criticize agencies. It's another one to help our farmers to reduce the impact they do actually have. And that's where the majority of our work is.
Okay, I like that. I want to get to the actual reduction. I want to get to what you're doing. UC-Davis, a fine agricultural school, one of the top in the country. I want to hear all about all that. I also want to talk about these numbers as what the real herald of those numbers is. Before I do that, well, we're talking about sustainability. We're talking about environment. I want to talk to you about Land O'Lakes company, Truterra. Truterra has been a sponsor of my show here for a while. Truterra is focused on supporting farmers at every stage of the sustainability journey to help farmers plan, make, and maintain regenerative management practices that can improve agronomic, economic, and environmental sustainability of the farming operation for the long term. In other words, sustainability programs are going to be an opportunity to pick up side revenue, which is very important when we're in a down ag economy. You can make money for doing things that are good for the environment and also good for your ground. Strip till, reduce till, cover crops, reduction of nitrogen, all those kinds of things. So anyway, check out TruterraAg.com. That's TruterraAg.com, part of Land O'Lakes. Okay, first off, before we talk about the mitigation, the big part here is we eat. We got 8 billion people, the majority of whom eat meat, vast majority of whom eat meat, depending on which country you're talking about. India, about a third of the people say they're vegetarian. There's some discrepancy as to whether that's even true. The point is, we eat. And you talked about in some of these developing countries, the best thing they can do with some of the type of ground they have is go out and graze sheep, goats, and cattle and get animal protein, be it milk or meat, from them. And so if 11% of all greenhouse gases come from livestock, but also those livestock are feeding 8 billion people, I still say that's not that big of a deal. When you've got the industrial sector and you've got and by the way, is this all based on man-made? Because if it's 11% of all man-made greenhouse gas emissions, Frank, what about all the volcanoes? What about all of the carbon releases from natural sources? That's where I just wonder. I'm very skeptical, shall I say, that this is somehow going to kill us all, when in fact it's the industry that's feeding us all, not killing us all.
So first of all, the so-called natural emissions, volcanoes, oceans, soil, swamps, and so on, they are the natural background. Okay, so this is something that stays pretty stable over the centuries. The natural emissions. It's not that all of a sudden all the volcanoes start going off or so. They are a natural background. What is changing things is the human part of the greenhouse gas picture. That is what causes fluctuations. It's not the natural one, it's the human-caused one. And here the vast majority of greenhouse gases stem from the burning of fossil fuels, oil, coal, and gas. And we all do it. When we fly, when we drive, and so on, we all contribute to that. And that is carbon that was in the ground for a very long time, millions of years. That was originally plant and animal material that decomposed, fossilized, accumulated underground. And over the last 70 years, we took about half of that fossil carbon out of the ground. We burned it, and by doing so, we added it to the atmosphere. And when the sun hits those carbon molecules, they heat up. Now, you are absolutely right. Food production does have not just the intended, but also unintended consequences. Whether that's impacts on air, on water, on climate, there are impacts. In fact, all human activity has some kind of impact on our climate. We could say, hey, we don't need to drive cars. Why don't we all just ride bikes or walk? There's no reason for us to drive a car. We can just get from A to B by bike. But we all know that's ridiculous. I mean, you can have that argument for argument's sake, but it's not going to happen, okay? Or saying we don't have to fly. Well, you can say that all you want, but that's some ivory tower chit-chat. That's not reality, okay?
The reality is... Although there are, Professor Mitloehner, there are proposals. The World Economic Forum and some of these more frightening organizations proposing that we should have a limit of no more than one round-trip flight per human. And there are activists that don't realize they're being controlled, frankly, by these string pullers that think, and that's what scares me. The bastardized science to create political or economic outcomes for, shall I say, the controlling forces. It starts to look a lot like the king and the queen and then the peasants. We're going to have all the opulence and you are not, and that's where you do get traction. You and I both say it's ridiculous. You can't possibly not have an automobile.
Right.
Right. Global commerce can't happen without airplanes. These are realities. We can't switch over to all of us just living off of windmills right now or whatever to heat our homes. We all know this is reality, but there is a fringe, and it might be even more so. I sense that you're of European
descent.
It seems to have more of a footing in Europe than it does here, and it's got a hell of a good footing here of the fringe that believes this. So while you and I might say it's ridiculous, it does have some embrace.
Well, I would say that a few years ago, I would have agreed more with that than I would today. A few years ago, there was a very strong voice out there for the Green New Deal or the Green Deal or whatever they called it in Europe, or whatever they call it here. The reality has struck different populations throughout the world,
right,
in what it would mean if we were to make some of the changes that some of the extremists are suggesting. I don't see it happening. I don't see it happening in Ireland, in Finland, in the Netherlands. I see it happening a little bit in Germany, but there is already huge pushback. I don't see it happening in New Zealand, in Uruguay, in all these places that I visit frequently. It's definitely not happening here in the United States. I think that these voices are loud. Sometimes they are powerful, but they are making their little plans without considering the vast majority of people. In the United States today, 98%, 98% of all refrigerators contain animal source foods, meat, milk, dairy, meat, milk, eggs, and so forth. 98%. And that is the reality. And so rather than telling people what to eat, what I can promise you is not an exercise that will succeed. We've seen it over and over and over again. Just think of the Impossible Burger or Beyond Meat.
Yeah, right.
They were sure that by 2035, they would have outperformed all animal source foods.
Didn't they predict some ungodly thing like they were going to have half the protein market or 1/3 or something that was
they wanted to take it over by then.
Yeah, you and I both said that that's outlandish. But then there is the issue of the control. I mean, there's a real push using these numbers. And I know we're going to get to the mitigation and all those things. There is a real push. And I know I made you go down a little bit of a political road, which maybe you're not comfortable doing. Whoever would have thought you left Germany and went to California and somehow you've gotten to a less government-oriented place by going from, who would have thought that?
Oh, I wouldn't say that California is a less government-regulated place. California is very heavily regulated.
I know that.
Definitely the most regulated in the United States.
There's no question.
But I can tell you, I have seen even here some very encouraging developments. California is the only place in this country and maybe in the world that has decided to make aggressive environmental progress through using reasonable approaches. For example, rather than using the stick approach of rules, regulations, fines, and or taxes, California uses the carrot approach of financially incentivizing farmers to reduce emissions. So if you reduce emissions by 30-40%, let's say emissions of methane, and you generate carbon credits, there will be financial incentive. And that has generated real momentum within our agricultural enterprises here, causing massive reductions of methane. The state of California's dairy industry, which is the strongest in the nation, will reduce 40% of methane by 2030.
Based on what baseline year? 2020?
The baseline year is 2013.
2013, okay. 40% reduction between 2013 and the year 2030.
2013 versus 2030. So within that time period, our farmers will have reduced not 40%, but more than 40% of methane. And what is great about that is not just that many things are cost effective, but what's even greater is that when you reduce this particular greenhouse gas methane, then you are actually reducing warming. Not just do you have less of an impact, but you are reducing net warming because methane is a gas that's short-lived. Okay, it is not just produced by things such as cows or swamps or rice paddies, but it's also naturally destroyed. If you have a stable source of methane, then over 12 years or so, almost everything that was produced will be destroyed. If you increase methane over time, then you increase warming, and you don't want to do that. But if you learn to mitigate methane, for example, through biogas capture or the feeding of feed additives to cattle or better breeding, and there are other ways. If you reduce methane, then you reduce warming. And that makes our agricultural sector part of a climate solution, which is a total change in the narrative around livestock and climate.
Okay, those are facts, and those are things happening, and those are things that you know in the largest dairy-producing state in the Union, California, at an agricultural school. The average suburbanite that gets told by the activist groups that are well-funded that drinking milk is destroying the earth or that cow farts are warming up the climate, they believe that. And so what you've just said resonates with me and everyone that listens to this who is an agricultural professional, and I have a pretty darn smart, well-educated audience. But what you just said isn't hitting the masses. Will it?
Well, I can tell you, I'm doing what I can.
I know that. But do you think that there's enough embrace of the real science to overcome the whatever the other side is being fueled by, which is either activism or what have you?
So when I said I'm doing my part, what I meant to say is a few years back, 5 years back, I established a center here at UC-Davis called the CLEAR Center. And that CLEAR Center does, of course, research like we always have, but an equal core of equal standing to the research core is the communications core. Yeah. And so I have hired professional communicators on my team who do just that. And we are reaching CNN, and we are reaching New York Times, and we are reaching the LA Times, and You name it, we are out there. And we are, even more importantly, on social media, where my Twitter handle alone has twice the number of impressions as the UC-Davis flagship Twitter account combined. So I tell you, we are doing our part and we are getting the word out.
Yeah. What about, okay, I want to hear about the other things that can happen here, and then where I think it needs to go, meaning on reduction of emissions, and also who needs to push it out for us. And I'll get to that in a second. Before I do, another commercial break here for Redox Bionutrients. Redox Bionutrients wants you to know, if you're a Midwest corn, soybean, or wheat producer, the Evolution Agronomic Strategy from Redox Bionutrients is a new way of thinking of getting more with less through ultra-efficient plant nutrition and superior biostimulants. Redox, a family-owned and operated business in Burley, Idaho, with 30 years of success throughout the United States and abroad. Redox's Pathway program combines flagship products like Mainstay SI and Banks with breakthrough nitrogen optimization through their new RDXN technology. That's on the back of my hat right here. See RDXN. If you're watching this show, Redox, the logo up there on the side of my hat, that's what we're talking about. For more, you want to learn more about this, including detailed information in agronomics, go to redoxgrows.com/Midwest. Okay. I appreciate you communicating that. Here's another one that I want to go with. We make all these efforts, and we are getting in agriculture more calories produced with less natural resources consumed every day. That's pretty much our track record. We're doing amazing things, especially modern agriculture. Europe, United States, Canada, even Brazil at this point. But then you've got the developing countries. You mentioned Paraguay, for instance, or the African nations. But what we're doing in modern agriculture is nothing short of amazing. Yet in your homeland of Europe, dairy farms are being put out of business in the Netherlands by environmental parameters, but it's really by politicians that I think there's something more sinister behind it. I think it's that they want to seize the land for development, or that there's some other thing. Those are the most efficient, least natural resource consuming, least emittive facilities probably in the world, and yet they're being shut down under the guise of nitrates and nitrous oxide, which is the new boogeyman. Frank, it seems like we jumped right from carbon to nitrous. What the hell? You can't feel good when you see that.
Well, I will give you a little nuance here. I was being made aware of this Dutch initiative of, they wanted to buy a third of their dairies and swine operation out of business by putting 20 billion euros, that's a B, billion euros on the table.
And that's roughly, compared to dollars, that's still
about the same.
It's
about the same.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost 1-to-1. Okay. So they wanted to put 20 billion on the table to buy a third of all farms out of business. And if you had to sign the dotted line to sell your farm, you would have signed also that not just you won't go back into farming, but neither will your kids. That led to mass protests all over the Netherlands with tens of thousands of tractors on the streets.
Yep.
The same thing then happened in Germany, in Spain, all over Europe, in France, in Ireland, in Wales, I mean, you name it. And to my great surprise, not just in the Netherlands did a government topple over that. They have a new government now, totally different from the one before. And all of this is off the table. People can sell their farm and they get the market price, but they're not forced out of business. Okay.
It's not by almost a forced nationalization, and also the government decree that then also we're making so that you never re-enter agriculture, nor do your offspring. It became very anti-agricultural.
Right.
And it's hard.
This is over. But this is not on the table anymore. I mean, if you're a small farm, you want to sell to the government, you can, and you get market price. But they are not forcing you out of it. The European Union, with the Commission leading the whole shebang, they're developing a new agricultural policy. Originally, the plan was to tell people what to eat, not to eat animal source food. Little. That's no longer part of it. It's no longer part of it. It's out of there. I attended a meeting in Brussels, sorry, not in Brussels, in Belgium last year, where it was about the future of agriculture in the European Union. The only scientist they invited was Frank Mitloehner from UC-Davis to talk about the future of agriculture in the European Union. And I almost fell over. I thought, why are there no European scientists here? I mean, I've been here at UC-Davis for 22 years. So while I'm from Germany originally, why were there no European scientists? They weren't. But the policies in Europe have changed. In Germany, the Green Party, for example, they wanted to run all kinds of anti-agricultural schemes. Those are no longer on the table.
You know what's interesting is I talked to you and Folta, your buddy Folta, and I should go ahead and tell the listeners here and the viewers. And if you're a listener and you want to be a viewer, remember the Damian Mason YouTube channel. I need more subscribers. Just go there. It doesn't cost anything. Go on YouTube, type in Damian Mason channel, hit subscribe on the YouTube because it's a great show. You can watch it. You can see how attractive and handsome this German professor is right here. And the other part of it is you can go on Acres TV and watch it there. But the point is, I had Folta on a few months ago. We talked about nutrient content of foods. And Folta and you're both professors, sharp guys. You make me hate government less than I thought I did, at least for a while when we're talking. Like, I generally am an anti-government guy, and then you come on the show and you make me hate government not as much as I did. Same thing with Folta. So there you go. You got that. But anyway, so, you're feeling better about where things... You need to laugh more, Frank. Anyway, I say things...
I'm German, I don't laugh.
I say things that are mildly amusing. Even Folta laughed, but he's all right. Anyway, I'm gonna watch his University of Northern Illinois Huskies play tomorrow in South Bend. Anyway, you feel better about where things are headed than I did.
I do, and here's why. I do because when a parliament comes up with some real nonsensical stuff, then I view my role as getting involved, writing them a letter or being a speaker on a governmental panel where I can communicate in ways they understand. And I'm not being dismissive now or demeaning. I really mean that. To break down things that are complicated from a scientific perspective in ways everybody in the room understands. And then they step back and say, whoa, maybe we went too far. For example, in New Zealand, they wanted to have a methane tax.
Yeah.
Everybody with ruminant livestock was supposed to be taxed.
Yes.
Off the table. It's gone. I was involved last year. I'm not saying that I did that, but I was part of it. Same thing with Ireland. They wanted to get rid of 200,000 cattle to reduce their carbon footprint. Mm-hmm. They invited me to speak in front of the Irish Parliament. I did. And it's a different picture today. Mm-hmm. I see that if you get involved as an expert with governments, and you are not quiet and shy and just do your little scientific thing, but you actually partake in policy making and so on, then you can have a real impact.
You are optimistic. I appreciate that, and you've seen that we've scaled this back or dialed this back or repelled this. This is probably the right word, but it comes back. You can keep the mosquitoes away, but they keep coming back, and that's what I'm concerned about. You were talking about something. I know you got to go because you got another call. Some of the things that you're doing to reduce this, which if we can publicize that, and I think the food companies, I think that not the customers that are in the suburbs, the customers of our products that make them into products. That's where and I think that's happening. You're seeing some of that. Source verified and all this sort of thing, sustainability programs, et cetera. I think it's incumbent upon them. We've been hearing this horse shit forever, Frank, at these ag meetings. You got to go and tell your story. So some farm wife in Nebraska is supposed to tell everybody about the greenhouse gas emission reduction on her cows. And it's a challenge because then everybody says, well, you're too close to it. You're just trying to sell cows. But if Kroger were involved or Walmart or the beef companies or the Tyson or whatever, isn't that where the real benefit is?
Yeah, definitely.
They have the bigger megaphone, the bigger pockets, and the bigger customer base.
There's no doubt. I've been involved with Burger King, let's say. You remember Burger King a couple of years came out with a video showing a little boy.
I do. I loved the commercial. Scared. The little boy was talking about how we were reducing cow farts. And you know what? I have scolded agriculture. I produced videos and scolded agriculture. I said, you idiots maligned Burger King. They were trying to tell their customer base, eat all the Whoppers you want. It's okay because every head of beef that we buy is being fed a lemongrass ration, which reduces greenhouse gas emissions. But the farm people that don't understand marketing said, they're bashing on us out here for cow farts. I'm like, no, they're telling the customer, eat all the Whoppers you want, and it's okay. Nothing sells like telling customers, just keep doing what you're doing, and you're actually helping the environment. That's where ag screwed up when Burger King tried to help us.
Yeah, so I'm just telling you, I have been I've been working not just with some governments or some agricultural commodity groups or so, but also with chains such as Burger King or Costco or McDonald's, because if you work with them, you move the needle. Okay, whether you like it or not, you can't just work with some local co-op. Yeah. You have to deal with the big boys and girls. Otherwise, you're not moving the needle, and moving the needle is what I want to do.
I appreciate that. You didn't like my recap of the Burger King thing when I had to yell at the ag people for behaving stupidly, thinking that somehow Burger King was bashing them, when instead they were actually trying to sell Whoppers, which should be very good for beef production. That's what they're in the business of doing. It was so illustrative of how production ag views everything. They didn't even think for 1 second that this was actually going to help them sell more beef. You got that?
Well, it's an interesting perspective. I mean, I had issues with it because what they fed to cattle didn't really do the job. And there were a couple of details around it that I objected to.
You objected to the commercial, and now you're mad because I objected to people objecting to the commercial. But the point is, Burger King was doing, when you look at the big picture, what Burger King was attempting to do was tell the customer base that it's okay to eat Whoppers, because obviously they want to sell Whoppers. And maybe that's where this thing done differently to appease you and the producers, done differently, telling customers that it's okay to eat livestock products ultimately probably does help, right?
And I think that's how it should be done. The way this needs to be done, in my opinion, is, first of all, farmers need to stop saying, look, what we do is perfect. Just stay out of our business. We know what we're doing. Everything is great. Give us license to operate. It's no longer working that way, okay? People now want to know what they eat more than 10, 20 years ago. They have some other objectives rather than just looking at nutrients and packaging. And so because people in agriculture want to sell to these consumers, they have to pay attention to these topics. And so, in my opinion, there are now ways that we can operate in a near cost-neutral way and still have that social license to operate, because we can reduce environmental footprint. We can optimize animal welfare. We can generate farming conditions that attract and retain a workforce in place. Yeah. It's possible. We know how to do it, but we have to get to it.
All right, you get the last wrap on this. I feel like I offended you now because I bashed on people who objected to the Burger King commercial. Anyway, I've loved having you on here. I know you got to go to your other meeting. Get me out of here. Where are we going to be 1 year, 2 years, 3 years? You've been working on this for a long time. Does the EPA and the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations give agriculture the credit that we deserve and let people eat what they want? Or do you think there continues to be a push to control diets using the narrative of greenhouse gas emissions?
So this whole thing with the World Economic Forum that you quoted earlier, I think these are a bunch of, I don't want to say what I'm really thinking of them.
No, say it.
I don't think highly of them. I can tell you that right now, okay? And my general stance here is never wrestle with a pig. You both get dirty and the pig will like it. Okay? So I'm not wrestling with that type of audience. But the others, I have to say, have come a long ways. For example, the FAO today says, look, if we do business as usual, here will be the carbon footprint of livestock by 2050. If we reduce it to the maximum amount, this is where we could be. And then they're saying these are tools that can get us to that desirable outcome. And that desirable outcome includes measures that I would absolutely support and that I have been supporting for as long as I've been in agricultural research. These things include breeding, production improvements, better healthcare, and so forth. The FAO today says, changing the diet from an omnivore diet to a plant-based diet is not the most effective way to reduce the carbon footprint. They say it's the second least effective way to decrease the carbon footprint of food. That's what the FAO says today. Yeah, they put out a report recently that states just that.
And I'm fascinated that there's been any movement at all because of that. But yes, and on the World Economic Forum, if you are an ag person listening to Frank and me, and you have never seen this on your radar, for God's sakes, you better pay attention. It's sort of a ruling class. It's a ruling class kind of a thing. It's definitely a fiefdom arrangement, it appears to me, where they're going to make decisions that control the world, but it doesn't really impact them. They get together every year in Davos, Switzerland, and discuss that. You feel good about stuff. You've made me feel better than I thought I did.
Well, that's good.
I mean, I still feel bad. I still feel bad that we disagreed about the Burger King commercial. But if you and I, what's the old thing? You can tell a German, but you can't tell them much. I mean, if you and I only disagree about one thing in all of this, in 35 minutes together, that's not bad, right?
No, I think that sometimes you have a bunch of marketing people put something out which they think is funny. You know, as a German, I don't have a sense of humor, so I didn't think it was funny. What bugged me about the whole thing was that they had their facts wrong, and it just irked me on several fronts. But I can see your viewpoints as well. Okay, I can absolutely see that, but I think they could have done it in a more clever way.
Yeah, I actually didn't think it was very funny either. And I thought I had to watch it 3 times to even understand what the people in agriculture were so worked up about, because I didn't even understand it. As a little kid in a cow costume playing a pretend guitar, it took me a while to even understand. It was a convoluted commercial. So frankly, from a marketing standpoint and from a scientific agricultural standpoint, it probably failed on all fronts. So you and I both can agree on that. You go to your other meeting, my friend. I greatly appreciate you being on here. Will you please come back again in a couple of years, and we'll see how this see if the powers that want to force us into veganism have made any ground or have lost ground. Would you come back and do that?
Absolutely. Yeah. You take care now.
I appreciate it. His name is Professor Frank Mitloehner. He's got a big following, as he said. He's got twice the following on Twitter that UC-Davis does. He's a professor at UC-Davis, animal science. Go look him up. I found out about he came on my radar a few different times. I think we cover some of the same ground a little bit, frankly. He does speaking. I do speaking, obviously, at agricultural events. And then also the New York Times decided that he wasn't the right person to be talking about this, and it kind of became a blow up. So he's not afraid to back away from controversy. I like him, or conflict. Thanks for being on, my friend.
You're welcome. Take care. Right. See you next time.
Thanks for being here. I'm Damian Mason, and this is The Business of Agriculture. Hey, thanks for being here. This episode of The Business of Agriculture was brought to you by Pattern Ag. You've heard me talk about Pattern Ag because I think it's a pretty cool concept. New technology that allows you to predict the problems you're going to have and therefore treat them before those problems cost you money. What kind of problems am I talking about? Pests and disease. Things like corn rootworm, sudden death syndrome, cyst nematode, and a whole bunch of other bad things that happen out there in the field that can cost you money. Guess what? Pattern Ag will let you find out ahead of time if the disease or the pest pressure is there, and therefore you're treating it before it costs you any money. What a great concept. Go to pattern.ag, that's www.pattern.ag, to learn more about their product, their technology, how it can make you money, save you yield, and also where you can find a rep that can come out there and do the work for you. Pattern.ag.